Stash Wyslouch here. Welcome to quick tip number 71. Thanks to all who are patrons. If you're not, please consider becoming a patron on my Patreon page to get access to all my quick tips, 70 plus, monthly workshops, supplemental materials, and a great way to support my teaching efforts here on YouTube. Today I want to share a three-prong practice routine. I got this idea from Billy Contreras. It kind of congealed everything I wanted to approach in music. The three prongs are this: improvisation, structure, and composition. This three-prong approach can pretty much be applied to any aim in music. Improvisation. Let's say you have a 45-minute practice routine. A third of it, 15 minutes, could just be spent improvising. So these three different prongs have very much to do with the headspace. So for example, improvisation, you need to put yourself in the headspace where you're just making music. You're in the moment. No matter the flaws, no matter what's happening, you're just going. Yes, and. Okay, that note. Okay, I messed it up. It doesn't matter. We're just in the moment. We have to make music. This is a great space because naturally, that's the kind of space that we're in when we're actually getting out there and playing with other people. You're not sitting there and constantly correcting yourself. No. You did something and then that dictates what you do next. That dictates what other people do next. If my aim is I want to be better at playing a fiddle tune, I maybe will sit there and improvise on a fiddle tune for 15 minutes and just see what happens. You're just flowing. You're just going. Maybe you have a metronome. Maybe you have a backing track. Next, structure. The structural headspace is where you put the lab coat on. All of a sudden you're a scientist. You're figuring out the mechanics. You're figuring out what your fingers need to do. So for example, I want to get better at playing fiddle tunes. Well, maybe now in the structural time of your practice routine, here's where you could start putting it on different places in the neck. You know, I'm thinking of quick tip number 3. So you might spend, after improvising for 15 minutes just putting the same tune in a different place on the neck and making sure that's totally solidified. Lastly, we have composition. And here's where you kind of gel part 1 and 2. So when we sit down and compose in our practice routine, that could mean, for example, arrange a version of that fiddle tune one time through in a way that you really like to hear it. Maybe you can't improvise that kind of cool stuff that you're composing in the moment. Maybe you don't totally understand all the structural elements and how you could extrapolate them to all parts of the neck. But you'll have one kind of idealized version that sort of gives you something that you're constantly reaching towards. And as you're practicing improvisation and structure, you have this sort of beacon, this composition that maybe you work on at the beginning of the week, and throughout the week you see how through these incremental steps, these different prongs in your practice routine, you can start to chip away at it and get closer and closer to this idealized thing you're composing. Now the scale of time can be very different. You could be thinking about this three-prong approach over the course of a whole lifetime. You could be thinking about this over the course of a week. You could be thinking about the course of this between now and when you record your next album, whenever that may be. But I find this is such a great universal way to practice improvising. I mean, let's take a different aim and see how we would separate the different prongs. Maybe your aim is, I want to play vocal melodies with more chordal information. So instead of just playing, darling, I have come to tell you, well, maybe you want to play implying the chords that you're doing. Okay, cool. So that maybe involves knowing some triads. Now, one of the great things about this three-prong approach is at the beginning of the week, beginning of the year, beginning of your life, you might not start with the improvisation depending on your aim. You might start with the structural part because you need to figure out where some of these things are. That's fine. So start with the structure. The structure in relation to that aim would be, well, I need to know where the triads are in relation to my notes. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can refer to Quick Tips 27, 28, that vicinity. I talk a lot about harmonizing melodies with triads. So you have to just figure out where these notes are, one step at a time. Again, there's always going to be a million options, especially on the guitar, banjo, mandolin. But you start with what you got for those 15 minutes and you come up with something solid, structure. All right. Then, once you have some of the locations, for example, the triads, okay, let's say I wanted to harmonize the melody on the lower part of the triad as opposed to the top. interesting. Now maybe I can improvise. Oh, with that exact structure that I came up with, could I do some cross-picking in a kind of loose, improvisatory way? Same phrase. Then you could sit down and compose the perfect idealized version where maybe sometimes you're playing the melody at the bottom of the triad, sometimes at the top of the triad. Etc., etc. This is such a flexible way. No matter where you are in your progress as a musician, you could boil down your practice routine to these three different elements: improvisation, structure, and composition. It's great to have a private teacher who can see where you're at from the outside and maybe could prescribe some things if you've never done this before. Let's say another more advanced aim. You're a little farther along. I want to be able to play atonally over Byron Berline's Gold Rush. All right. What does that mean? It could mean a lot of things. So I have to narrow it down maybe. What kind of atonality are we going to go for? Maybe we could take a motif from the tune and put it in different keys and see if we could interject that in an improvisatory way. So for structure, isolate a motif in the A part, for example. Well, here's the A part. Oh, I like that last riff. Cool, well maybe I need to learn to play that in a few different keys. Let's take a position. Let's take open position. That's an E. It's like an E major something or other. Okay, cool. Let's do the exact same set of intervals, but down a major third. Okay, let's do that down a major third. Cool. Alright, so in the structured part, I'm teaching my fingers to do something. Improvisation, I could just mess up and decide for the second A part, I'm just going to sort of riff on these motifs in different keys. Just messing around, seeing what's available. Then maybe I'll go in and try to compose an exact variation that I can really get behind. Over the course of the week, some interesting things will happen. Each of these phases of your practice routine, improvise, structure, and composition, they start to blend into each other. The composition starts to sound like the improv. The improv starts to sound like the composition. The structure is leaking into both. And you really get this very complete sense that you're attacking an aim with all your musical faculties. So this is a little bit of an abstract philosophical quick tip, but I hope it gives you ideas on basically how to conquer any musical problem that you're dealing with these days, especially if you are an aspiring improvising musician in whatever style. Thanks so much. I hope you become a patron on my Patreon page, and we'll see you next time.